Great. Well, do we have any questions from the audience first? Mark.
So one of the things that was debated a great deal was the whole question, when the funding decision was being made, was the whole question about feedback. And I think it reached a point where if there was something obvious that was detected at the time, then there might be feedback. And just looking at some of the brain images, it looks as though feedback was necessary for some of these. I'm just curious as to how many people did have feedback as a result of their imaging. Was it in sort of high numbers, or was it significant?
Dawood, do you want to comment on that? Or?
Yeah, it is relatively small numbers, and we do have a process. If the radiographer suspects an incidental finding, then we send those images for review, and if there is something that's noteworthy, we'll write to them and their GP. I don't know the actual numbers. I don't know if Nye or Adam actually know. 2%.
In the initial pilot, it was about 2 point, a bit above that, and then in the full study, it's been below that. It's been closer to 2. So about 2.9 in the original study of 1,000, and then it dropped down to about 2.
I mean, interestingly, I mean, is there any clinical follow-up to find out what happened? I mean, they're still presumably participants, so in principle, you should know.
Rory, do you want to take that question?
Sure. We did a pilot study where we had the first 1,000 participants went through 2 different protocols. One where the technician picked up something and then that was checked, and that's what we've been doing through the main study. So about 4% technicians saw something. They were largely in the body rather than the brain or the heart, and then 2% were confirmed and went on. The alternative was to actually have experts look at every single scan, and in that case, about 20% got some feedback, again, largely in the body. And then we did follow up with both participants and with their GPs to find out what happened. We haven't continued that follow-up, but what we found out from the pilot study was that with the 20%, about 1 in 12 or so turned out to be real anomalies, real issues. So there was a lot of false positives. Those false positives often resulted in interventions or investigations that were quite invasive. I think normal lung lobes removed, normal ovaries were removed. Someone sold their car, their Rolls Royce. I won't go into that one. And so clearly we were going to cause a lot of harm with a lot of feedback. We haven't followed on that. We do make sure that participants and their GPs do get the feedback. Even with the 2% in the pilot, we found only about 1 in 3 were real anomalies, and a lot of those even were things that one wouldn't do anything about, in that they were not normal, but they weren't something you were going to follow up. Yes. But once we link into the primary care data, then the ability to really find out what happened to people who have had feedback will be, if you like, automatic.
So this is another thing that I think UK Biobank has done really well. It's highlighted the role of radiographers as someone who can lead imaging studies. So if you look at the use of MRI across clinical trials historically, people are always worried about, what if I find a cyst, what if I find this, that and the other. And actually as a frontline clinician, I can say, well, what if you do? Like you're actually trying to treat breast cancer or liver disease or heart disease or whatever. The fact now that UK Biobank set the precedent that you can have radiographers as the first line, and they just won't miss stuff, and more to the point, they won't cause unnecessary worry, partly because they've actually seen the patient, has really set the bar. So a lot of commercial clinical trials now do what UK Biobank does, and the whole sort of, oh my God, what if we see so many things that we didn't know about before, that's kind of rested a little bit. It's a bit like Google Maps, right? When you look at Google Maps and you look at your borough, you see stuff that you didn't know existed. Actually, you can live with it.
Yeah, and these methods are incredibly sensitive, which is why they make great epidemiological tools, but sensitivity is not what we always want in clinical practice. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, Mark Coley from the BMA. Given you've got these high-quality 3D MRI scans pretty much for the whole body, are there any controls on the use of that data to prevent rendering, for example, of the face? Because you could make in publicity or in research journals, or you could put pictures of people, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Which would be recognised.
Yeah, I can answer about that. Yes, we are defacing all the scans from the head, so and we are not disseminating non-defaced volumes, so that would not be possible. Recreating the face would not be possible.
So defacing, electronically scrambling the image at the front. Okay, other questions? Claire.
Thanks, Paul. Again, just congratulations, because there's huge amounts of work in here and it's really enabling for a wide variety of researchers across the community. So thank you, firstly. Not to make you pick favourite children, but given all the imaging that was involved, is there a modality or area that you think has produced the most surprising or unexpected outcomes from making this investment? And a secondary, if I may, what do you wish was in there that isn't in there? So if you could go back and redo it, what would you add to the mix?
Well, that's a great question, and you have to. Each parent has a different favorite child. So let me ask each of the parents in the panel. So could I start with you, Louise? What's your favorite, and what does it produce?
I have to be honest, I love it all. It's just fantastic. I think what's been good for me is I'm very fat biased, and I was never interested in things without fat, but I've now become interested in muscle, mostly because it contains fat. But I think we've found out a lot about the population. And what would I have added? I have to be honest, if I'd been negotiating the UK Biobank sequence personally, we would never have got to 100,000, because I'm about perfection. I want the fingertips, the toes, I want everything. It would never have happened because it would have taken too long. So I think what the sequences that ended up were the right things for the information we have.
And let me echo that. UK Biobank taught all of us a great deal about how to run a big study. But Wenjia, you're a more dispassionate observer. Do you have a favorite organ?
So my favorite finding is that I realized that we can model the human anatomy in these computational models. Because in the past, although I've been working on CAD imaging for almost over a decade, when I draw all these meshes for the left ventricle or the right ventricle, they all look quite similar to me. And in human eyes, I cannot tell the difference, how this mesh is different from that mesh. And I realized that these computational models, you can develop them, and they can tell the difference between two meshes, even if the two meshes have similar volume, but completely different shapes, and this can all be detected by the computer models. And that is something I think is quite surprising, because this is currently can't be done with human eyes, but can be done with computer models.
And what's missing from UK Biobank, just very quickly?
Missing from UK Biobank is that I don't think it's, for my research, I don't think it's missing anything. I think it's very rich, but I want to know how I can link all the different kind of information. For example, genomics, imaging. Actually, they are both, I regard them both of languages describing our human body, but I don't know what is the best way to link them at the moment.
Great. Mark.
When I saw the cardiac information, it reminded me that Dennis Noble, many years ago, was trying to create a complete physiological model of the heart. And of course, the thing that is missing at the moment is the electrophysiology, because mapping that on top of the motility would be an incredibly important thing to do. I mean, I'm not sure how much ECG will give you, but it may give you something.
Yeah.
Maybe I can comment. So one of my colleagues, Stephen Needler, they published a paper on Nature Cardiovascular Research just last month. And what they did is they used UK Biobank data. And from the segmentation, they can create this mesh I've just shown. And from the mesh, you can put some partial differential equation into those to simulate the electrophysiology. But those only give you the signals on the mesh. And then we need to have some kind of a torso model to then transfer those electric signal onto the body surface and simulate. There are some leads on the body surface, and to get the simulated ECG data from there. And in that way, you can compare this simulated ECG from the real imaging data to the real ECG you acquired from UK Biobank. However, in this whole process, you can see there is these PD equations, there are some hyperparameters, and also for the torso model, how can you set the correct attenuation coefficient when the electricity passes onto the body surface, and on the body surface where you do put this simulated ECG lead position. There is some uncertainty in this, but it demonstrates that the whole pipeline is technically feasible.
So it just goes to show these data are continuing to change. It's not just collected and done and dusted. Other questions for the audience?
Paul, could I just say?
Yeah. Go
You
ahead.
can have, of course, I would say you can have anything you want as
Yeah.
long as it's cheap, quick to use, and reliable equipment from an operations perspective.
Great. No, it's great. And another, yes, please.
Kimberly Riley from the Coalition for Aligning Science. So if you all will indulge me for a moment, given the richness of this data, I'm really curious about some of the future questions we can ask and how you all are intending to use the data. So if I'm thinking about the last talk that we heard and looking at the arterial blood flow, how that correlated with hypertension, do you all think that you'll be able to then take that data and see if it precedes, say, vascular dementia or some other neurodegenerative disease? How can we take some of this imaging data and sort of layer that on top of other disease areas? I'm just curious for your
Key
thoughts.
question. Fidel, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, we have not studied that, but yes, that can be possible. The goal of this project is to find early markers of disease. So yeah, that's one of the possibilities, of course.
Yeah, as more clinical outcomes data becomes available to UK Biobank, these data which are acquired at the time points that they were acquired in the past will become more and more valuable as predictors of future disease. And as we get more data from the GPs and from the electronic health system within the NHS, it's going to just grow in value over time. Another final question, just very brief question and a super quick answer. Okay, Rory.
It is worth mentioning, I think, two things. What kind of assays one might do on the samples that would be particularly relevant in the repeat, in the imaging assessment. So proteomics is now going to be done using Olink on all of the baseline, but also all of the biological samples collected during the imaging assessments. So those may be very relevant. But to Mark's point, and also to Echimenes, the cardiac monitor, which British Heart Foundation funded, which is going on the chest for 2 weeks of cardiac monitoring, is giving us a lot of information about arrhythmias, but it's also giving us a lot of information about sleep, activity, and indeed gait. All of which I think will add usefully to the information from imaging and about things like Parkinson's, dementia, etc.
Great. Well, thank you for your attention, and I want to thank all of the panel members and speakers for really fantastic talks. Now we have tea for 15 minutes, and please try to be back promptly because we're on quite a tight schedule this afternoon, I gather. Jenny tells me.